Hi guys, it's Alex here, and now we're going to show the most difficult of the fundamental checkmates by far. If you are a beginner, I don't advise that you try to learn this particular checkmate. All the other ones, king and queen, king and rook, king and two bishops, these are great to learn. But king, bishop, and knight is tricky enough and advanced enough that even grandmasters have in tournament games suffered the embarrassment of not knowing how to deliver checkmate with king, bishop, and knight. So, first of all, similar to king and two bishops, what we want to do is we want to take the king either to the corner, and we can deliver checkmate in this way. For example, we can arrange our pieces like this, or to a square next to the corner, and again, this would be checkmate, or this would be checkmate. The most important thing to keep in mind, first and foremost, is that the corner must be the corner of the color of your bishop. So if in this case, here, we have a dark squared bishop, the black king must eventually be driven to either the h8 square or the a1 square in order to deliver checkmate. If, on the other hand, our bishop is on c4, the black king must eventually be driven to h1 or to a8. So what we will now find out is how we can actually do this depending on the type of position that we have. So there are two major techniques that we must know and two major categories of positions that we must understand. The two types of positions are so-called open positions and closed positions. Closed positions are where white is able to prevent the black king from reaching the longest diagonal of the color opposite to that of the bishop. So that's a little bit of a mouthful. What do we mean by that? So in this case, the longest diagonal of the color opposite to the bishop would be the diagonal from a1 to h8. So why we are interested in this type of position, why we define it like this, is can we imagine a situation where the black king is unable to reach this diagonal and therefore unable to go to the wrong color square? Remember, if we have a light squared bishop, we want to drive it to a light square. So it's useful to recognize if we have a position where the black king is unable to escape onto a dark square, to run to a dark square. Let's take an example of this. Let's imagine that we have our bishop here, let's say, and now the black king is on b7. We put our king on d6, and we put, let's say, our knight on b3. In this case, we can see that the black king is caught, unable to run to either a1 or h8. It cannot access this long diagonal of the color opposite to our bishop. Why can it not do this? Well, if it tries to run via c8 and d8, it hits a roadblock on e8. The bishop covers the square. If, on the other hand, it tries to run via b6, then at this point it hits a roadblock because our knight and our bishop and even our king combine to control all of these squares a5, b5, and c5. Therefore, we can say that it is in a net, and from here we just need to know how to tighten this net. In fact, in order to do this, we will use a method called Delétang's triangle method. So we will explain this shortly. This is closed positions. But there are other positions which are open positions. And what open positions means is a position where the black king, in this case, the enemy king, is not restricted from running to the corners or from accessing the long diagonal and running to the corners of the color opposite to our bishop. As a result, the black king will typically do this if the opponent knows that on these squares we cannot deliver checkmate. The king will typically run to one of those squares. So here, we call these open positions. We cannot prevent it, and we cannot therefore use Delétang's triangle method just yet. We need a different method. So the method is to allow the black king to drive himself, if he wishes, to the wrong corner. And once we are there, once we have him in the wrong corner, we then drive him to the right corner. And in order to do this, we use a method called the W method. So, to sum up for now, we have two fundamental types of positions: open positions and closed positions. And we have two techniques that we must understand. Delétang's triangle method is useful for closed positions, and the W maneuver is necessary for open positions where the king is on the wrong color corner. So, I understand that's quite a lot, but let's now show some practical examples that will hopefully make it easier to absorb this information. So, let's get to it. Okay, so for the first example, we have got a situation where the black king, we must ask ourselves, can it run to the corners of the color opposite to our bishop? We have a light squared bishop. Can it run to either of the dark squared corners? And we can see that it's not actually possible for the black king to run. If it tries to run to this corner here, it's impossible because our bishop covers. So it can now attempt to run to the other dark squared corner, so it begins its journey. But here, we see that we control c6 and we control a6. The square we don't control is b6, because we also notice our king covers d6. So what we try to do is we will place our knight to control, because we have a light squared bishop, we try and control the dark squares with our knight. So we use, if we have a light squared bishop, we use our king and our knight to cover the dark squares, as the bishop can only cover the light squares. So here we want to control b6, and we play knight c4. This covers the square. And now if we actually take a look, we can see that d6, c6, b6, and a6 are all controlled by our pieces. In fact, we don't even need the king. Let's imagine that our king was on e7. We can see that there is no square possible to move forward, and so the black king is stuck in a net here. We call this Delétang's net, or in this case, Delétang's second net. Why do we call this the second net or the second triangle? Well, because we can actually create three different types of nets. The first net is the net where the light squared bishop is on the second longest diagonal possible. In this case, for example, if we construct a position like this, we can see that the black king cannot run in this direction, and so the black king will try to run towards this other corner, this dark squared corner. Our bishop is on the second longest diagonal, and so we have to think, where can we put the knight so as to prevent access to some of these dark squares to prevent the king from running. For example, we could place our knight on d3. From here, we cover some critical dark squares, c5 and b4. Now, if we can imagine a situation where the black king is given two moves, he runs into this roadblock. Our bishop covers c4 and a4, and our knight covers c5 and b4. Our bishop also covers d5, so there's no option to cut through this way either. In this case, we can see is in Delétang's first net or first triangle. Why this is the first triangle we should understand. So the bishop is on a 7 square diagonal here. We can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 square diagonal. And Delétang's first net is characterized by the fact that all of the white pieces must combine to imprison the black king. We then eventually aim to bring the black king onto Delétang's second triangle. So if the first one is the 7 square diagonal, the second would be when we have a situation where our bishop can be on a 5 square diagonal, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and our pieces combine. Let me show you an example, so that the black king cannot escape. So here we see c5 and a5 are covered by our knight, and the remaining light squares by the bishop. The black king is stuck because the squares near to the 7th and 8th rank are controlled by our king. This is Delétang's second net. Eventually, we want to drive the king further to the corner and establish a position where the black king is locked in Delétang's third triangle or third net. And here we see it's on a 3 square diagonal. So the process that we must go for to repeat is we must first try and see if we have a closed position. That is a position where our 3 pieces are combining. Let me set up an example. Our 3 pieces combine to prevent the black king from running to the wrong colored corner. That is the corner of the color opposite to the color of our bishop. If we see that this is the case, but our bishop is on a 7 square diagonal, we will know that we are in Delétang's first triangle, and we must tighten that net progressively. Eventually, we drive the king backwards, and when we have a position where our king, knight, and bishop are combining in order to prevent the black king from escaping, and our bishop is on a 5 square diagonal, we know we now have established Delétang's second net. The ultimate goal is to drive the king further so that we have Delétang's third net. In this case, we don't even need the knight to restrict the enemy king. And here the king is in a corner with each time having less and less squares. And eventually we will bring our knight into play and we will create a checkmate, such as, for example, this one here, as shown earlier in the video. We want a checkmate either on the corner square or on the square next to the corner square. So let us show an example of how to do this from beginning to end. Let me place a position right now. Okay, so here we can see that although we have a dark squared bishop, we have it on a 7 square diagonal. The first thing we test is, do we have the black king trapped in such a way, imprisoned in such a way that the black king cannot run to the corners of the color opposite to our bishop. Those squares would be h1, which is clearly not possible, and a8. Now, a8 might seem possible, but if we look at the enemy king's path towards a8, we can see that our knight is covering some important squares, e4, e6, and d7. So if we try to drive the king forward, eventually we will encounter roadblocks. We can get the king as far as e7, but here d8 and d6 are controlled by our bishop, and our knight controls the key light squares. In this case, d7 prevents this way of running, and e6 prevents this way of running. So therefore, we can see that the king is actually trapped. And the reason why Delétang's triangle method is called a triangle is because we can see that the bishop forms the hypotenuse of the triangle, and then we have the king trapped between h2, b8, and h8. So we have a triangle shape. Let's go back to the starting position here, and now let's see how we can deliver checkmate. White waits with a move like king f2, and now black plays king to f5. This is the most stubborn defense. Now white goes king f3, approaching with the king aggressively, king g5, and white opposes the king. After king f5, white now plays king h4, trying to progressively restrict the black king. King g6 is played, and now king g4. Opposition again. King f6 is played, opposition again with king f4. Now we get a situation where the black king cannot run to e6, and if it runs to e7, it is pushed back along the rank. So black tries to resist the advance of the white king with the move king g6. But this now allows us to cast a second net. Can you see what move will allow us to take our bishop from a 7 square diagonal to a 5 square diagonal? The move is bishop to d8. We see now the triangle is from h4 to h8 to d8. We are in Delétang's second triangle. Black plays king f7, white now goes king f5, king e8, attacking our bishop, and we drop the bishop back to g5. The king is unable to escape its net because the escape square, the most likely escape square d7, is controlled by our knight. One useful piece of information to keep in mind is that in order to control the maximum number of squares, we have a bishop controls the dark squares, and so it's easier for us in this case to control dark squares. So we want to combine with our remaining pieces, especially with our knight. We want the knight to focus on controlling the light squares. So you want to have, in general, your bishop and your knight on the same color square. And the reason for this is because a knight from a dark square can control only light squares, while a knight on a light square can control only dark squares. So this is a very typical beginner mistake. You put the knight on a light square, you put your bishop on a dark square, and effectively you have two minor pieces that are only controlling dark squares between them, and the black king will wriggle around along the light squares. So you want the two pieces, you're aiming for the two pieces to be on the same color square. Here we have the net. Black resists the white king. Now white plays knight to e4, king e8, and king to e6. Black goes king f8, and now the knight takes away the e8 square, knight d6. King g7, and white plays king f5 to take away the g6 square. King f8 is the most stubborn move. King g6. Now the king has been pushed back to a rank, and the only square available is king g8. Now can you see how to cast the third net? Well, we want to move from a 7 square diagonal to a 5 square diagonal, and now to a 3 square diagonal. So bishop h6. Now the king is stuck. It can only move between h8 and g8, and after king h8, here we play knight e4. There are various ways to checkmate, of course, but this is just one of them. King goes to g8, knight f6 check, king goes to h8. We see that our knight will cover one of the light squares that our king cannot cover. If our king was here, it could cover g8, but it cannot cover h7, so we want our knight to cover one of these squares. For example, our knight here could cover h7, and then we would deliver checkmate in this way, bishop g7. So the final position here, in this particular example, we deliver checkmate with bishop to g7. So that is Delétang's triangle method, and you must remember, we have open positions, they are the most common but also the trickiest, and we have closed positions. So far we have dealt with closed positions. If you have a closed position, the goal is to progressively tighten Delétang's net. You go from a triangle where your bishop is forming the hypotenuse, it's a 7 square diagonal, to a 5 square diagonal, and finally to a 3 square diagonal where you deliver checkmate. So we've now covered the closed positions where we use Delétang's triangle method. That is the easiest approach. And now we're going to move to the open positions. We will show you how to checkmate from an open position in the next video. So see you there.